Hello to all of my young gardeners. This is Susu, and fall is arriving this week. I'm sure you've noticed that the mornings are cool and crisp, and the days are getting shorter. And as I've been walking through the woods, I'm starting to notice that the acorns are falling from the oak trees. So I thought it would be a good time for us to talk about oaks. There are about 90 different species of oaks in the United States, and we use the wood from the oak trees to make furniture and build homes. What's also important is the acorns, or the fruit from the oak tree, is also used as food for animals that live in the forest and woods. They are now collecting and eating all the acorns they can find, and they're storing them, and they will eat them throughout the winter so that they have food to eat when there's not really much else to find. And I opened up this one acorn so that you could see the inside, and this is the part of the acorn that the animals are wanting to get to. And it also contains the seed that will produce another oak tree. That's why we call acorns fruit. And you may think, oh, that's kind of odd to call an acorn fruit because humans really don't eat acorns. And that's true. But anything that has a seed in it that's produced by a plant is called the fruit. And it may not be something that people eat, but there usually is some animal or insect that will eat the fruit. So we call it fruit. And while I was mentioning that people don't necessarily eat acorns, the main reason is because they have tannins, which is a toxin to humans. But if you wanted to eat certain acorns, you can boil them in water, and then that would do away with the tannins and the toxins. So you could eat them, even though we don't ordinarily eat acorns. It's kind of good to know that you could if you really needed to. Now, please keep in mind that you really want to have an adult with you if you eat anything from nature. Now that you're all getting interested, I really wanted to point out that it's very important before you put anything in your mouth from the woods that you're exploring, you really need to check with an adult. And sometimes you even need an expert to tell you whether that is something you can eat or not. Because in nature, it seems like every plant has a look-alike. So something that you may think you know what it is, it may be disguised as something else. So you really want to make sure that you know what you're eating before you take a bite. Now, the first oak we're going to talk about is the pin oak. And the pin oak is pretty easy to identify. If you look at the leaves on the pin oak, the surface is very shiny and glossy. And if you turn it over, it's a lighter green color, but it's more dull. And another way that you can tell a pin oak is by these sinuses. These empty spaces is basically what they are very deep. You can see that the leaf of the pin oak has lobes, and they're very narrow, which creates these large sinuses, these empty spaces. You can see that this one is cut very close to the center of the leaf, and here is the midrib, this vein that goes all the way down the center. And there's not very much leaf right there where the sinuses are very close together. So that's a very important key. Another thing to look at on pin oaks is the bristles. At every tip, and the tips are pointed, you will see a bristle, and it's almost like a little hair right here at the end. And like I said, everywhere you look, you're going to see a little bristle on the tip, like right there. So that's another way to identify it, is to make sure it has bristles on every tip. If you flip over a pin oak, you can look in the center where the veins are touching the midrib, and you'll see these little tufts of hair right there in the center. That's another way that you can identify a pin oak. But the best way, I think, to identify most oaks is by looking at the acorns. And this acorn on the pin oak is very small. It's only about a half an inch tall, and it has a little saucer cap on top. Every pin oak has a saucer, and really every oak tree has acorns that have caps on top, and the caps are used to attach to the oak tree. This is where the acorn was attached to the tree. But the saucer just lays right on top of the acorn, and it's very tiny, so that's a good clue. The next oak I would like to talk about is the white oak. The white oak is also pretty easy to identify because you want to look at the leaf, the outside of the leaf, and they're rounded instead of pointed. Do you notice that? These edges are rounded. And if you look at the sinuses or the empty spaces around the lobes, they're very shallow. They don't go really deep towards the midrib like the pin oak does. But again, the easiest way to tell a white oak is to look at the acorn. And you can see right here, these are joined, and sometimes you'll see the acorns joined together. And this is where it was attached to the tree. But the caps on the on the white oak are very bumpy. Do you see that? They have raised bumps all the way across the top. And the cap of the white oak acorn comes almost halfway down the acorn. So that's another thing that you want to look at. And this is the meat inside the acorn. That's what the animals are trying to get out and eat. So the white oak, the key is the bumpy cap on the acorn and the round lobes on the edge of every leaf. The next oak is the red oak. The red oak has pointy leaves just like the pin oak, and it also has the bristles at the tips of every single pointy tip. The leaves are a little larger, and the sinuses are much more shallow than the pin oak. They don't go very deep, as you can see. But again, the best way to identify a red oak is to look at the acorn. And the acorns are very large on the red oaks. They're about 1.5 inches tall, and they're also about 1.5 inches close wide. And they also have a saucer cap that's pretty large. Here's just a cap that had come off of an acorn, and you can see all the way around it. And it also has a very cool texture around the edge. It's almost like shingles on a roof because they overlay and lay down on top of one another so that you have this very cool textured look. And you can also look at the color on the acorn for the red oak. You've got some green and brown. They're not all going to be identical. They're going to vary somewhat, but you can see where it has the tan and the dark brown, and you'll also see some green on some of them. So that's the red oak. The last oak that I wanted to talk about is the black oak. Now, I don't have a leaf for the black oak, but it looks a lot like the red oak leaf. The main difference between the black oak and the red oak is with the black oak, the sinuses cut much deeper into the leaf. Not as deep as the pin oak, but it does come down a little bit further than the red oak does. But again, the best way to tell a black oak is to look at the acorns. And you can see the way the cap comes down halfway onto the acorn. It covers just about the whole top. It doesn't sit on the top like the red oak does. It comes down. And what also is interesting about the black oak is where the cap comes down, it's a little rough. They don't all lay down completely flat against the acorn. So that's a really key point to the black oak, and you can see it right there. See how they're kind of rough and they're not laying flat on the cap. So that's how you can identify oak trees. You want to look at the acorn, you want to look at the leaves, you want to see if they have pointy ends, if they have bristles, and you really want to look at the sinuses, the empty spaces in between the lobes of the leaves. And you also want to look at those acorns and see what they look like. But another way that we haven't really talked about is if you look at the bark. The bark on different oak trees looks differently. And sometimes that's the only way you can gauge what kind of oak you're looking at, is if you're looking at the bark. And it really takes some practice to distinguish the difference between the two. Now, another way is if you have an oak tree that's fallen down and it's split, you can also look at the color of the wood. With red oaks, the wood is going to be more orange with a little bit of red, whereas the white oaks are going to be much lighter and be closer to a white color or a tan color. So there you have it as an introduction to oak trees. I hope that this fall you will be able to get out into the woods and into your yard and see if you can find some acorns and see if you can identify what oak tree resides near you. I hope you have a great fall and have fun exploring. Over and out from Susu's Garden. Love you.